What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. This week, we are going to be breaking down some recent trends in professional bass fishing tournaments related to fishing around different species of fish. There have been several tournaments now in a row where the winning pattern has basically revolved around fishing in areas that are loaded with non-bass species, whether that's crappie, white bass, or a variety of other things. It's a very interesting trend, and it's kind of strange that it's happening in so many tournaments in a row with such a wide variety of lakes, but it's something I think that we can all take a lot of information away from, and I'm going to break it down as best I can with the information that I have, and hopefully help you guys find some new techniques to use on your home lake. I also need to break down the recent Bassmaster Open on Lake Eufaula and give a recap of how my prediction went last week. My last live stream from last Monday that I have posted on the Fish the Moment live stream, or the Fish the Moment live channel, and also on the Fish the Moment podcast, basically had my prediction of how the tournament was going to go down, so we'll see if I was right or not. Before we jump into that, though, I want to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of the Fish the Moment podcast and live stream, Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford has the best beef jerky on the market, guys. It is super tender, super soft, and it is great to take on the boat whenever you're out there idling around, fishing, whatever you're doing. I always have a pack of Bridgeford beef jerky on me at all times. It's easy to fit in the glove box, and it gives me a great protein source from out in the lake, so I don't get tired or worn down, and I keep my energy up. So definitely make sure you try some Bridgeford beef jerky next time you're at your local Walmart, dollar stores, or gas stations. They support bass fishing, they support this channel, so make sure to support them as well. They're one of the best companies out there for supporting fishing. It's not like an actual fishing lure company or an endemic company, so definitely check out Bridgeford Foods next time you see them in the checkout aisle. Awesome. So let's jump straight into it here, guys. And I apologize if I'm a little bit slow in this live stream. I did a 13-hour car ride yesterday, so I was driving for 13 hours. So I was taking a nap here a little bit earlier, so I'm not maybe as hyped up as usual, but we'll get into it as the stream goes on. So appreciate that. And also want to give a huge shout out to everyone who is on the stream right now. We got Ernest, Timo, Guy, Greg, Henrik, Todd, Gabe, Josh, Chris, Danny, Steven, Nick, Sharon, Bobby. How's it going, guys? Guys, sorry to hear about the health issues, but glad you're still watching, and hopefully everyone's enjoying. So it seems like people are actually getting the notifications, so maybe since I'm doing these weekly now at 6 o'clock, it's starting to happen where people can see the notification. Some people are saying it's still late, so hopefully we're still seeing it, but it'll be good. Okay, so Bassmaster Open time, guys. The Bassmaster Open was on Lake Eufaula this past weekend. We broke it down in the last stream, and the Deep Dive app kind of knocked it out of the park. We smashed it. Let's just kind of roll through here. I want to talk about some of the top patterns. Overall, when we were looking at the top patterns from the Deep Dive app, I shared some slides, and I'll share that over here as well. Let me pull up my full screen here. Here we go. So we pulled up some slides in terms of where the anglers are going to be fishing, what patterns we thought were going to be the most effective, and we saw that basically from our deep dive data, which is from the pre-spawn specifically on Lake Eufaula tournaments over the years, 73% of tournaments were won offshore, 23%, or actually not one, but just had top finishes. So like top 10 finishes, 73% of the top 10 finishes came offshore, 27% of the top 10 finishes came shallow. Section of the lake was mainly first half of the creek to main lake, across the lake. Water clarity, you wanted to fish in about stained water clarity because that's what you got out there. In terms of the top structure, it was offshore flats, rounded points, and then pockets up shallow, and also some secondary points. Offshore flats was definitely the dominant pattern over the last several tournaments out there in the pre-spawn, as well as rounded points. And then we have cover, which is brush piles, bank grass, and then shell beds was down here at 6%. Now, the shell beds dominated in this tournament, and I mentioned that in my last live stream. I said the brush piles are going to get so covered up with other fishermen that I didn't think that there was going to be as much of a brush pile bite. And I said, if I was fishing this tournament, I would fish shell beds or track down the bait fish. And if you read a lot of these articles on Bassmaster.com, go through the footage, you'll see that most of the top finishers were fishing what they called hard spots, quote-unquote hard spots. Hard spots are just another word for shell bed. A shell bed is basically a place where there's mussel shells that wash up onto these flats and they create a hard spot. So these guys are fishing shell beds. And if we look at the baits, deep diving crankbait, deep diving jerkbait, and then a spinner bait, kind of some of the key players offshore, bladed jig up shallow, deep diving crankbait, deep diving jerkbait, spinner bait, definitely all players. Not as much as deep diving jerkbait because there wasn't as much of a brush pile pattern this tournament. But if we jump over to the Bassmaster article over here, we can see that from terms of the top baits, I'm actually going to skip all the way to the bottom and go up because they put the winner last. The winner was fishing deep diving crankbaits. He had 2 different deep diving crankbaits he used, and yeah, that was pretty much all he threw. He threw 2 deeper diving crankbaits. Second place was throwing a big spinner bait, deep diving crankbait, and that was pretty much it. And then let's see here, got deep diving crankbaits. Deep diving crankbaits, by the way, called it with the Milliken fishing. Finished 5th, representing the YouTubers, which is awesome. I said the Milliken would have a really good chance in this tournament if he uses offshore skills, track down some of those fish offshore. And there was some fish that were following schools of shad, moving up in and on top of these offshore flats and on these high spots. And there were shell beds up there, and these guys were crushing it. Keep going there. Deep diving crankbait again. Football jig for one of the anglers, and then there was a shaky head and a spinner bait bite as well. Shaky head for a couple other guys as well, some shallow fishing. Deep diving crankbait again. And bladed jig. We saw the bladed jig from John Canada. That was one of the shallow water anglers as well as with a spinner bait that made it into that top 10. And there were a few shallow water guys. So basically the distribution was almost exactly like we saw on the app. 73% offshore, 27% shallow. Baits were pretty much, deep diving crankbait was the top bait. That's what it showed in the tournament results. So deep dive was spot on, and my prediction was pretty much spot on that it was going to get 1. I kind of did a little drawing over here on Google Earth for you guys. I basically said that I felt like some of the key areas, I still have my circles from last week, are this area down here on some of these offshore flats, more offshore flats in this mid-lake area here, and then some of these backwater areas for the shallow water fish. It's pretty much where it went down. So pretty cool that the Deep Dive app played out right on par with what happened. One of the anglers, I don't know exactly where these guys were fishing because they didn't have live coverage, so it's hard to tell exactly where these guys were. But if we go over to Navionics, one of the anglers who finished second in the tournament, I'll listen to one of his interviews, and he basically was saying that was, let me see, it was Brett Cannon. Brett Cannon, I listened to one of his interviews, and he was saying that he was fishing around some islands, and really there's not that many islands on this lake. You have a couple of islands way up the lake up here, but based on the water visibility and the fact that he was fishing a super deep diving crankbait, pretty confident he was down in this lower end. And he mentioned he was fishing some rounded points off of some of these major islands. Now, I'm not sure if he was fishing a rounded point over here, if it was this island over here, or maybe it was one of these major islands over here where you have these rounded points that stick off these islands. Either way, he said that there were some hard spots that were setting up on these islands, and the hard spots were scattered out across some of these rounded points or these offshore flats, and that's where these guys were getting the job done. From the looks of it, I think a lot of these guys were fishing these deeper flats out here. I don't know exactly how deep, probably in that 18 to 20 foot zone, given that a lot of guys were throwing, again, deeper diving crankbaits, Strike King, 10XDs, 8XDs, things like that. But the 8 and the 10XD was kind of the big player. So usually that means they're going to be in that 18 to 20 foot zone. So the fish were definitely deeper than expected. And I was not sure exactly when we were prepping for this tournament in the live stream last week whether the guys were going to be catching them more on like these type of deeper ledges and deeper parts of these ditches and drains, or if they were going to be catching them up shallower. Water temperatures were really warm, but the fish were still in the pre-spawn mode. So pretty good deal, and excited to get that information out and actually get it accurate. So that was pretty awesome. The water temp, there was a question, what was water temp? Water temperatures were in the 60s, and I think that some of the guys who were fishing up the lake were saying that they found water temperatures up into the high 70s, which is crazy. So it's not like the weather was cold by any means, but most of the fish that they were catching were really deep. They were in that 18 to 20 foot zone still pre-spawn. And that's a really big takeaway, guys, from a tournament like this. A lot of anglers, they expect that when those water temperatures are very warm, that they need to be fishing up shallow, go straight to the bank. Water temperatures are warming up, the fish are going to be moving up, and even though there was water temperatures out in these areas that were in the backs of these pockets, in the backs of these coves, in the 70s, those bass don't just immediately move up and start spawning the second that that water warms up. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and we talked about that in the last stream. But basically, you have the moon phase, you have the water levels, you have the length of the day, how much sun is actually up for how long. All of those things will impact whether these bass are actually going to spawn or not, and that will have a big impact on your strategies in these tournaments or whenever you go fishing. And in general, I like to try to stay away from that spawn as long as possible, because when you get to these pre-spawn bass, they're so much more aggressive and easy to catch. From what it sounded like, guys were getting on these flats and these edges of these channels. Again, I don't know exactly where these guys were fishing, just because I wasn't able to see live coverage or anything like that, so I don't have exact spots. But let's just say one of these spots is one of these like horseshoe channel bends, and it's 15, 16 foot up here. This is a very obvious place where shell beds are going to stop and set up. And the way you kind of tell where you're going to find shell beds, if you guys are like, how do you find shell beds? How do you find hard spots? Basically what happens is that the current is going to be flowing from these creeks out down to the dam on any lowland reservoir that has current. So the current's going to be flowing basically from north to south on this lake because the dam is down by the south. And what's going to happen is that these current is going to pull water through these major creek channels that we can see highlighted very dark black right here. And whenever you have the current pushing through a creek channel, it's going to wash water over the top of these bends and turns, and basically the water is going to follow this line, crash against the shallower water as it follows these channels, and that's going to deposit shells and also kind of clean off the bottom. It's going to clean off a lot of the silt, a lot of the dirt, stuff like that, because that water is crashing into a specific spot. And when you get an area like this bend right here, where that water is crashing in as it turns, another area right here where it crashes in right here, it crashes in and then it makes a turn, these areas are going to get cleaned off, and those shells are going to sit there, and mussel bells are going to start growing on these spots because they feed as on that water that's being pushed over and around these ledges. So they'll set up on the inside bends of these turns, the outside bends, and the way that you can find them is one with your electronics, or second just by dragging around like a Carolina rig or a deep diving crankbait and feeling for those hard spots with a bait. Now, most of the guys who probably were out here knew where a lot of these hard spots and shell beds were, or they had the skills to graph for them with their electronics, most likely. So that's kind of the deal on that. But ideally, what these guys are going to be doing is they're going to be graphing as many of these as they can and then looking for a school of fish. Now, the one thing that was interesting about this tournament is that the schools of fish were mixed. You had massive groups of fish that had both bass and white bass in them. And that is very typical a lot of times on these lowland reservoir, like river system type lakes. But most of the time, it's rare that you hear guys actually talking about in the interviews so much that, hey, I would pull up on a little ledge or a hard spot where this channel swings in, and then I would catch 15 spotted or 15 white bass, or like 9 or 10 white bass in a row, then change the color of my bait, change the speed of my retrieve or something, maybe go a little bit deeper, a little bit heavier bait, something like that, and then start catching 9 or 10 largemouth bass in a row. And that's what was happening. A lot of these guys were fishing in schools that were mixed with white bass and with largemouth, and you were seeing them catch them in the footage and in the photos, and it was pretty crazy to see that because I'll pull up some of these photos just so you guys can see what I'm talking about. It's just very interesting how this works because most of, let's see here, I'm going to try to find, most of the guys that were fishing in the top 10 and doing well, they were catching these white bass and these largemouth mixed. Now, there's some of these guys that are fishing shallow. I'm going to scroll through some of this. Let's see here. Small fish. This was from day one. They had one of the leaders. Here we go. This is Brett Cannon, finished second in the tournament. Caught really nice largemouth there, cranking a deep diving crankbait. and then scroll through here. There we go. Next cast, same spot, catches a big white bass. So he's literally catching mix of white bass and largemouth bass on these same spots. And that is kind of a common theme that we're going to talk about. Here's Ben Milliken, catching the white bass off his spot, but then also he's catching big largemouth off the exact same areas, throwing a glide bait. Looks like he's throwing the glide bait a little bit, but he's also throwing, obviously, those deep diving crankbaits he was showing. So there's that combination of the spotted bass, or I keep saying spotted bass, the white bass, and also the largemouth. Now, this is a very common thread this year because in the last two Bassmaster Elite Series events, something similar happened. Basically, you had the Florida tournament that was won by Tyler Rivette. He was fishing around a ton of crappie, and there was another type of fish he was trying to fish for, but they basically were crappie or some other species, and they were loaded in this canal. So if we go down to Lake Okeechobee down here, basically he was fishing in one of these canals that was wrapped around the lake, and I don't know exactly which canal it was. It was one of these, or it was up here maybe. I think it was maybe up here in one of these canals. I'm not 100% sure, guys. Sorry if I'm butchering this. But he was in one of these little canals. I think he was in one of these chutes or something here. And basically, he was fishing with the live scope, trying to catch crappie, trying to catch food to take home and eat at the RV park or wherever he was camping. And while he was trying to fish for dinner, he was catching big largemouth bass, and he ended up winning the tournament fishing around other species. So he found the other species first and then caught the largemouth. Same exact thing happened in the next event with Joey Cifuentes over here on Lake Seminole. He was fishing in Spring Creek, and the area he was fishing basically was a set of standing timber that was in 20 to 25 feet of water, and he basically said that there's standing timber throughout this entirety of this creek, all the way through up in this area, but the one little stretch he found that was most productive for him was where he found spawning crappie. And basically what was happening is that crappie were spawning. Let me see here. I'm going to pull up my display. There we go. Right here, he was finding crappie that were spawning in the top. This is a brush pile, but basically standing timber. But standing timber brush pile, there were crappie spawning here, and the bass were sitting tight to the bottom, probably feeding on those small crappie, and that was their main food source. So you had a combination of guys fishing around crappie, around white bass, and around these other, whatever these Florida crappie things are, and it was probably not the primary fish you're seeing on your electronics when you go over these areas. You're probably not graphing over a spot like this and seeing the largemouth first. You're seeing the crappie first. You're seeing the white bass schools first. But because a lot of anglers probably went by that area, saw, oh, there's white bass everywhere, or, oh, there's crappie everywhere, I'm not going to bother fishing here, and move on. The guys who've been successful recently have been saying, wait a minute, if there are crappie here, the bass might be feeding on them. Or, oh, if there are white bass here, that means there's a lot of forage and bait here, and maybe I can find some bass mixed in with them. And that's been a deadly pattern for these guys, which is super cool to see and to witness. So I'm going to get a little bit more into that about how you can apply that on the lake. Before we do, I want to show you guys something pretty cool from the Deep Dive app here. And it's something that we just released literally today. And I told you guys I would keep you guys updated about the Deep Dive app, so keep it my promise. So we literally launched this today, and you guys can actually go into the Deep Dive app, Apple App Store, Google Play Store, and you can see this right now on your lakes. We have 26 lakes with water clarity. I'm going to get a list for my next YouTube video. I don't have a full list right here off the top of my head of which lakes we have water clarity on. And we've also added section of lake for 10 lakes and have about 50 more coming here in the very short future. So basically what you can do is if you log into the Deep Dive app and, for example, go to Grand Lake of the Cherokees, you're going to be able to see this new map view. This is basically our patterns viewer. And the patterns I was showing at the beginning of the video from Lake Eufaula, where I was showing you all these graphs and charts and all that stuff, this stuff here, all of this data that I was showing on the screen is now visible in the Deep Dive app with this map view. We don't have this chart view here like we have specifically here. We're going to work on that here in the future, but we don't have that out right now. But what you can do is you can actually browse all these patterns, for example, on like a Grand Lake, and you can scroll in here and you can see, for example, in the first half of Horse Creek here, what are proven tournament patterns that guys have used to finish in a top 10 on lakes that have very similar characteristics to Grand Lake or actual tournaments from Grand Lake. We combine multiple tournaments together into one. It's not just one tournament. So basically you can go in through here, then you can see, okay, medium diving crankbait on channel swing banks. Here's an example of rock transitions that you would use. Here's your retrieve, here's your gear. Kind of like how the Deep Dive app has been doing it. But now you can go in the back half of these creeks. You can see all these key patterns in the clear water. You can switch to the stained water. See, ooh, buzzbait pattern. That's kind of interesting. What's the deal there? What should I be looking for? And you can also come in here and you can change from the pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, summer, fall, winter. So you can look at all these tournament patterns. Again, top 10 finishes from pro tournaments filtered on a map. You can filter to shallow or offshore. You can filter to your vegetation, species of fish, lake level, whether you want forward-facing sonar or not. If you don't want to use forward-facing sonar, you can say no. If you do, you can say yes. All these things are filtered on here. And you can also, just click through all of these and you can start seeing where on your lake you're getting the highest percentage of tournament pattern wins. So for example, if you go through here, you can see, man, this main lake section here has 10 tournament top patterns. Probably going to be a good deal here when I'm fishing. What season do I have selected? Pre-spawn. Offshore, this might be my deal. If I want to fish offshore, I need to go to this main lake area. I need to be throwing a couple of these baits in the clear. If there's clear water, and if there's stained water in that area, I should be fishing these types of techniques. So you can filter between stained and clear. You can just kind of browse all this data. And it's a super great way to get tournament proven patterns for your lake that you can see visualized on a map. It worked really well for the Lake Eufaula tournament. I was pretty much spot on with how I predicted the tournament was going to go down, especially for most of the top 10. And that's because we use this data from top 10 finishes from tournaments on Lake Eufaula. So it's really good data, works really well. Definitely check it out. And if you do want to figure out, what is the water clarity, for example, in Horse Creek, is it clear, stained, or dirty? You can go to the clarity tab at the top and actually get the water clarity for Grand Lakes. And what you can actually do now is go over to this top right corner and click. There's a little button right here. I'll hopefully be able to show that on the screen. Right here you can click, and this little tool is actually clicking. I don't know if it actually is. Anyways, there's a tool in the top right below the X, and you can switch between this full view and this slider view, where you can actually slide through and figure out what the water clarity is on different swatches of the lake. So for example, if you start catching them in the first half of this creek here, Honey Creek, in this water visibility, you can set it to just highlight that section, and now you can say, okay, the first half of this creek, and then the next creek over, and then the mouth of Horse Creek, and the kind of the front half of this other creek here, these all have similar water visibilities, so I can now go around and find areas that are exactly like what I'm doing. You can also then say, okay, I'm fishing the first half of Honey Creek here, I know the clarity is pretty much stained, I'm going to now go through here in my patterns, click stained, and I know that these are going to be my key patterns that I need to be fishing on Grand Lake in the pre-spawn, and you get all that information. Now, one other question we've been getting a lot in the water clarity feature is, how does the water clarity feature work, all of those things? And I wanted to break that down for you guys as well, just to share that with you, because now we actually have more stuff in here and I can basically break it down. So to answer everyone's questions about water clarity, the way that it works is basically we're using satellite imagery, and we have an algorithm that basically allows us to determine the water visibility in between clear, stained, and dirty using satellite imagery. Now, if we look at Grand Lake here, you can see that the estimated water clarity right now is 1 week old. So we're actually putting the timing of how old the data is, because basically with satellite imagery, you're not going to be able to get a picture every single day of Grand Lake, because there might be clouds over the top of it, or there's a bunch of other reasons that you might not get the image. So right now, the water clarity estimate on Grand Lake is 1 week old. So when you go out to the lake, this is going to be a decent estimate, but the water clarity may change a little bit over the week if there's rain and things like that. And we are going to update this as often as possible, but not every single lake is going to have like daily water clarity updates, just because if you get a day where there's clouds everywhere, the satellite's just going to be looking at clouds and not at the lake. Now, if we go to, for example, some of our newer lakes that we've added in, like Lake 10 Killer, we just added this in the other day. This lake has 2-day-old footage. So not every single lake is going to have like a week old. It just depends on the region of the country, how the clouds were, all that stuff. And we've had a pretty bad patch where it's been pretty cloudy the last like 2 weeks here or across the entire country. So this coverage has been a little bit spotty. But then, like for example, January, we had images almost every 2 to 3 days for almost all the lakes. So it's going to be up and down, and we're working on ways to improve that as well. But that's a little bit more transparency for you guys on how we're getting the water clarity. And you get the water clarity estimate now in the Deep Dive app as well. So if you guys are interested in the Deep Dive app, you can check it out on the Apple App Store, Google Play Store. Download it, check out these water clarity maps. We have it for more lakes every single day, and I'm going to, going forward, give you guys a full list of which lakes have water clarity and the section of lake feature here. For example, 10 Killer doesn't have the section of lake feature, just the water clarity feature, and we'll give you guys a full update of that on the next stream, so you know exactly what lakes have it, which lakes don't, and we'll keep that list updated for you guys as we move forward. So that is the deal on Deep Dive. That is... Oh, I grabbed the wrong thing. Let's see here. Oh, what did I do? Oh, no. Okay, 1 second, guys. I'm screwing this all up. I need to find all my stuff. Give me a second here, guys. I'm getting everything screwed up here. Okay, let me put this on the screen. Let me move this, and then we're going to hide this. Oh my goodness. Okay, got a lot of stuff going on. Okay, and then we got to pull this back over here. Okay, we're back in business, guys. Okay, so let's jump in a little bit more on some of this tournament stuff that I was talking about, kind of the topic of this stream. And if you guys have any questions too, feel free to leave the questions over in the comments and everything like that. I don't see a ton of questions in here. I'm going to go through a little bit. There's a few questions I'll go through that I've gotten, and then I'll jump into the main meat of the stream here. But let's see here. Let's see. Won a derby Saturday in my old boat. No live scope. Won 2 out of the last 3. Great job, Sharon. Good deal. Joining live. Last time listening to an Apple podcast for months. Now on the way to work every morning. Appreciate that, Nick. Let's see here. Recommend throwing a big chatterbait deep on those hard spots. Definitely can be a player. I've actually caught them on a chatterbait fishing offshore. It's not the best bait for fishing super deep. In my experience, I normally cap it out at that like 10 to 15 foot range. But there is one bait, big bladed chatterbait, I'll share with you guys that I have caught them on. It's weird. I'll show you the chatterbait. It is this Picasso, and I have a bunch of these things, but it's this Picasso Aaron Martin's Shock large blade. It is a massive 1.5 to 2 ounce bait. I actually have these in the 1 ounce. They make them in the 1 ounce and the 1.5 and the 2. But this bait here, guys, will get it done. It will catch these fish. It has a big giant head. Your landing ratio and hookup ratio is not very good. But what I do with this is I basically just put a big fluke on the back of this, fire it out there, let it hit the bottom, and then just burn my reel handle 3 or 4 times and let it fall almost like a hair jig, and just kind of pop it up and let it fall, pop it up and let it fall, pop it up and let it fall. And I've lost some good fish on this. I've caught some good fish on this offshore. So this would be my recommendation. The chatterbait blade like this will raise the bait really fast. So if you're fishing it in deeper than 10 foot of water, it's really hard to fish it down deep. But with this 1.5 ounce head, you can actually get it down there deep. So yeah, that's something you might be able to do. Let's see here. Deep dive worked for me in a kayak derby on Table Rock Sunday. Awesome. Appreciate that, Bobby. Glad it worked for you. Are you using Navionics on your screen there, Steve? Yeah, this is Navionics. It's just Navionics web app. You can just Actually, I have it down in the description of the live stream. If you go to the description of the live stream, you'll see the Navionics web app link in the description. Can you tell the difference between bass, white bass, and largemouth on live scope? If so, how? Okay, so on live scope, basically, I'll give you my best guess on, or not my best guess, my best explanation I can on this. So I'm gonna put two screens here, and I'm just gonna turn this bass white. This is not the best way of doing this. Oh, I apologize, but I'm gonna turn this bass white. Let me change the color on this, and I'll switch to my screen. Okay. This is pretty sketch, so I apologize. But so I got a white bass here. This is a literal white bass. I just made my bass icon white. And then we got a regular bass. So let me show you what these look like. I don't have the live scope image on hand, so I'm not going to be able to give you guys the perfect live scope image. But I'll show you what bass look like in general. So if you're looking at bass setting up on a spot, in general they're going to be set up more horizontally than vertically. They're going to be spaced apart, kind of like this, and they're not going to be stacked more than 3 or 4 fish tall. And they're going to have some good space separating them. So they're going to be separated out. They're not going to be stacked right on top of each other. They don't like being right on top of each other or side to side. They like to have, imagine there's a 3-foot bubble around each of the bass. That's kind of how I think about it. Each of the bass has a 3-foot bubble around them. They're not going to be super tight together, and they're also not going to stack 8, 10, 15 fish tall. White bass, on the other hand, are the exact opposite. They will stack almost like crappie, where they'll be right on top of each other. They'll be just flooded through an area everywhere, and they'll stack really tall and really high up into the water. So if you're going to be fishing for white bass, you're going to see them stacked like this on the fish finder screen, on live scope, whatever you're looking at. They're going to be so tightly packed together, they're going to move in schools of 4 or 5 fish really tight together, and basically your largemouth will be more spread apart, the white bass will be super tight together. Now, striper are a different story, and actually another tournament that they fished over on Lake Murray, I think it was, for the Tackle Warehouse Pro Circuit, a lot of guys were catching stripers in the same areas they were catching their big spotted bass. Now, striper are a little bit trickier to differentiate because they set up a lot like bass at times, in the sense that they aren't going to be necessarily stacked on top of each other like white bass, but in general, striper are going to be a lot bigger than your average bass. So what you're going to find is if you get into an area where you see really big returns, big bright dots, big arches on your 2D sonar, stuff like that, those are probably going to be striper most likely, unless you're dealing with a lake that has 5-pound striper and 5-pound bass everywhere. Most of these lakes are not going to have that. Lake Murray does, which makes it even trickier, so sometimes you have to fish through those areas. But the challenge that a lot of these guys were facing, I think, on Eufaula is that there were white bass like this on these spots, but there were also largemouth on these spots. So you had largemouth, and a lot of times what happens with these largemouth when you're fishing around striper and around the white bass is that the largemouth are going to set up underneath the white bass. And this is what I've just found in general from my experience. The largemouth will set up deeper than the striper or deeper than the white bass. And for whatever reason, they just basically like to sit underneath them and take the scraps if there's any shad that die or fall through or get pushed towards the bottom. So I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the guys in this last tournament were fishing deeper diving crankbaits. They were fishing their 10XDs, their 8XDs, baits that get down 15 to 20 feet deep, because I think a lot of these white bass were probably up in that 6 to 15-foot zone, and they were all over these ledges and humps and things like that. And the largemouth were sitting up underneath them. So what I've done in the past, and I can't speak for what everyone else was doing, but what I've done in the past is I've found schools of white bass on Lake Dardanelle. They're setting up in 4 to 8 foot of water, and I've taken a deeper diving crankbait and fished down in about 15 foot, which is deeper than you normally would fish on a Lake Dardanelle. And the school of white bass would be here. Now I would put my boat, basically, if I would, I don't know if I can grab a picture. Basically, my boat, I'm gonna insert a shape. I don't have a boat icon. This is my boat. That's a bad boat, but let's just say that's my boat. I would put my boat so that my trolling motor is almost on top of the white bass school, and then I would cast my bait way past the white bass and try to dredge my bait up the ledges, up the slopes, or maybe fishing parallel on these slopes, trying to hit as far underneath those white bass schools as I can. I would graph the white bass. I would see them in, let's say, 10 foot was the max depth they would be in. I would try to fish below that, and usually that will result in me catching more largemouth. Same thing happens when I'm fishing on a beaver lake or a table rock lake where there's a lot of striper. In those situations, especially Beaver Lake, the striper will set up really high, closer to the surface, and they're very aggressive. So you have to try to get a bait past them, and a lot of times what you're trying to do is you'll have, let's say I'll duplicate this. A lot of times you'll have a situation where the white bass, or sorry, the striper, I'm getting all my terms messed up. The striper will be sitting up here higher in the water column, like this. And those bass, again, are underneath them. So you have to basically try to get a bait that falls fast enough past those striper that will actually get down to the bass. And you end up catching striper like probably two striper at every bass you catch. And they're literally mixed schools. But you have to get that bait, if you can, best you can, past those striper. And with live scope now, literally what I'm doing is I'm aiming at the striper and then trying to cast as far away from the striper as I can, keeping it out of their field of view to let it get down to the bottom. Then once it gets down to the bottom, I kind of like almost like some semi-troll my jig and stuff. Not necessarily trolling, but I'll like reposition my boat and then work my bait over a little bit. You can't troll technically in tournament fishing, but I try to basically just get that bait near the bottom and then maneuver my boat so that I can work the bait where I think the bass are. It's kind of a tricky deal. I don't know if that made any sense, but that's kind of how I do it. Now on the crappie are a little bit different. And I've done this a few times, mainly down in Texas and where you have really big fish. This isn't a pattern that works great for me on a lot of my highland reservoirs because there's not as many bigger bass. But whenever you have really big bass, let's say 5 to 8 pounders, finding brush piles with crappie on them can be a very effective way of catching better quality largemouth, because you'll find that those largemouth will set up at the base of the brush piles where crappie are sitting. Now, for whatever reason, I haven't had that much success with this on my lakes, like a beaver lake or a table rock lake, just day in and day out. I've had it work a couple times, but not very consistent. And that's because the average bass on my lake is 2.5 pounds versus like a Sam Rayburn Lake or Toledo Bend where the average bass size might be, I don't know, 6 pounds, 8 pounds on these offshore brush piles. I don't know the exact size. Maybe it's 4 pounds, but whatever. It's bigger than my lakes. And those bass can more easily feed on crappie. So you'll find that crappie becomes a really good forage source for those lakes with larger bass on them. For example, in like Lake Seminole, where there's really good 4 and 5 pound bass all over those areas, those largemouth can feed on those crappie, and they can also feed on shad as well and other things in those areas. The same thing kind of goes for bluegill, though bluegill are usually a little bit smaller than the crappie, so it's a little bit easier for those bass to feed on them compared to the crappie. But definitely, there are bass that will feed up on those crappies, and if you see an area where you find crappie and bass in it, those bass are usually going to be bigger bass than average. So that was a big tangent, but that also was kind of what I wanted to talk about in the stream anyways, so that worked out pretty well. Let me keep rolling here. Let's see. Water clarity coming anytime soon for California lakes. We are getting water clarity. The one thing with the water clarity that's tricky with the California lakes is how much they fluctuate. So we're trying to figure that one out right now. With the deep dive app and the water clarity, since it's satellite imagery, if the lake is like 15 feet low or 20 or 30 feet low, we may end up taking a picture of the ground as opposed to the water. So we're trying to figure out how to handle that massive fluctuation in water level out in California. But yeah, we're definitely working on that problem as well. Let's see here. How fast does the clarity update after rain? I just became a pro member last week. So Derek hopefully answered that question with the satellite. And we also have the water clarity estimate on there. So usually this is the nice thing, is after it rains, there's almost always clear skies the next day. You get a front or a second day after the front. So we found that most of the time, and I can't give an exact number off the top of my head, but most of the time you're going to be able to get a clear picture the day or two after a big rainstorm, just because there's not a bunch of clouds in the sky. So the main challenge we have is when it doesn't rain, but it's still cloudy for multiple days. So usually the water clarity, fortunately, does change the most after it rains. So that's hopefully well, hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, it should, from what I've seen at least, on times when it's raining pretty consistently, we're getting quite a few images that we can use to put the water clarity in, and it's been helping a lot on Beaver Lake and Grand for me, so seems to be working. And then, do you have a list of lakes that are already available and lakes that are coming soon? I will have that next week on the stream. Let's see here. I wonder how many pros use the deep dive app in the tournament. I know a fair few did. The challenge that we had, it's kind of a bummer on Eufaula. Literally, there hasn't been any rain on Eufaula, but it hasn't. We haven't gotten a good image on it because it's just been cloudy, like no rain, and that it's just been really high winds and just clouds. So we haven't really got a good image over there. We have a new image that actually popped up the day of the last tournament, but that didn't really help. So the image is now updated, but it wasn't for the tournament, so that was kind of a bummer for those guys. Scott says the water clarity feature is amazing. Appreciate that. Awesome map feature. Yeah, awesome. Appreciate that. Jetco. Clark's Hill, not Murray. Sorry, Mark. Yes, Clark's Hill. I knew I was getting that one wrong. Are we getting temps on deep dive soon? Stay tuned. Not anytime in the near future, but we're hoping to get there one day. Big bass love eating crappie on Lake Fork in Texas for sure. And what baits are you throwing at the crappie bass in the brush piles? So for the bass are feeding on crappie and brush piles, there's two baits I throw. Let me pull up this. Oh my goodness. Okay. There are two baits I throw, so I'll show both of those to you. The first is a Striking 10XD. That's usually my go-to. 8XDs also work pretty well, but a Striking 10XD, and I'm throwing it in this pearl black splatter with chartreuse. This is basically the perfect crappie imitator. I had one year on Sam Rayburn in the fall where I was cranking brush piles, and I found the deal with the crappie and the bass and all that stuff, and this was, it's like 2013. So this is pre-live scope offshore fishing, but I was cranking brush piles that were in 25 feet of water, topped out in about 18 to 20 foot, crappie all over them. I'd pull up, I was seeing big arches around, and I'm like, those are not crappie. So I started throwing a big crankbait like this and was burning it and bouncing off that brush pile, kind of trying to get near the base of the brush pile if I could, trying to get that crankbait down in that 22, 25 foot zone. And I caught a 6, an 8, like a 7, all in practice and crushed them. Tournament day, crappie boats were all over my brush piles, which kind of sucked. And so it didn't go as well during the tournament, but in practice it was going real well. I was able to get on my piles. But crappie guys came out in force tournament day. So that was kind of a bummer. But anyways, that's one of the baits. And then the other bait is the depths. What is it called? Is it the depths? It might not be the depths. Is it the depths? Let's see here. Am I right? There we go. Yeah, the depths. Heavyweight Sakamata shad. So this is basically a heavy weighted jerkbait, and I throw it in this pearl, or the blue glimmer, sorry. Looks like a crappie. It is you can get in the 6-inch and the 8-inch size. It is out of stock completely right now on Tackle Warehouse, which is not great. But you can find these on like the Tackle Hookup or other places as well. So look around for them. But the 8-inch size in this blue glimmer works great. It's a crappie imitator. It is pretty much the same size as the crappie. I go with a very big hook. So I'll go with like a... let's see if I can find one of them. Nope, that's not what I wanted. That's not the head. Let me go to terminal tackle. I don't even know which hooks I use. I had to go through and like really look for these hooks because that Sakamata shad is so big. I was using some type of I have some type of EWG hook I bought a while ago, and I just used those. But I have no idea what brand it was. Maybe so Gamakatsu, probably like the Super line, maybe. 6/0. 6/0's too small. It's like an 8/0 hook. I don't know. Oh, maybe it was an owner. 1 second. I'm going to try to find this for you. Owner. Was it this one? 7/0. Maybe it was this one. Maybe it was this owner wide gap plus 7/0. That might be the hook right there. It has a really wide gap to it, and it's a big 7/0 hook. I swear there's a hook that's even bigger than that, but I don't know what that is off the top of my head. But at least a 7/0 hook with that Sakamata shad. It sinks fast, so you can cast that thing out onto these brush piles and just sink it down and just work it through the brush. That works super well too for those crappie bass. Okay, let's see here. What category of structure is the crappie spot that Tyler Vet won on in Florida? Just curious. Basically, what I would classify that is a ditch. Is kind of the deal. I would classify it. It's also kind of like a canal mouth. There's not really a deep dive classification for this one. We're gonna have to add it when we're getting all the tournament data for Florida lakes. We've got all the tournament data. We're about to finish up TVA lake tournament data with all of the new stuff that we've been doing in visualizations. So when we visualize out on the map, we're gonna have that, but we don't have all the visualizations with the newest Florida tournaments. So once we get the new Florida tournaments in for the strategies and all that stuff, and we put them on the map, you're going to get this type of structure. I would probably call this a ditch, most likely. It's just a little ditch off of a channel. There's not really necessarily that many ditches, but I would consider like this a ditch too. Like this would be like a ditch in the mouth of this canal. This is a ditch as well. But it's basically a little ditch off of these canals and stuff like that is what I would call it. Good deal. Thanks, very helpful from Bobby. Appreciate that. Yep. I thought that crappie spot may have identified a gap in deep dive. Yeah, that's the thing that's tricky with the deep dive is the some of these structures and stuff on random lakes and random things. I don't know exactly what you would call this. This is kind of like a ditch mouth, quote unquote. It's the same thing that the guy was actually fishing on Seminole, so I might need to come up with a new name for that type of structure. The guy who was leading day one on Seminole is fishing way up this river up here, and he was fishing these like little run-ins where there's like a little small ditch or a little small creek that runs in. I don't even know, like this sort of thing, where these little creeks cut into the main river, and it's kind of this intersection of like these small tiny creeks and this, it might be like a creek mouth. I don't know exactly what you would call it, but there was water coming through these creeks when the water was getting pulled, and there was grass on either side, and he was catching them with a swim jig and a spinnerbait first day on Seminole. So yeah, that's a little deal, a little sneaky deal. Okay, so what else do you guys want to talk about? We got about 10 minutes left on the stream, so if you guys have anything else that you have interesting questions on or want me to cover, I think I covered everything I wanted to go through on the stream in terms of the last tournament, the crappie versus the white bass versus the striper, that sort of thing. I'm going to be doing a lot more of this, guys, in my videos, hopefully talking about this sort of deal. I'll probably make a dedicated Fish the Moment video to it, not just one of these live streams on it. But I wanted to get this information out as quick as I can to you guys. But I do have sonar recordings and live scope and down imaging, side imaging, all that stuff that will talk through this. Now, one thing I will say while I'm waiting for comments, the challenge with this sort of pattern is that not every single species of fish is going to attract bass around them. So, for example, whenever I start catching catfish on the lake, I feel like I never catch bass when the catfish are in the area. Or if I do, it's not like the bass and the catfish are mixed together. Now, with walleye, I do find that I will sometimes catch walleye and bass mixed together, which is kind of interesting, or like sawguy, stuff like that. You obviously see bass around bluegill and perch and stuff like that, but there's some species of fish that I just don't know if the bass really like to get around, like carp or gar. Whenever I see gar in an area, I don't catch bass around those, or like spoonbill, stuff like that. So I think it really depends, but I think there's a lot more to learn in that sort of situation. The one thing I will say is that I do think that there's an overlooked deal in tournament bass fishing, or just in fishermen in general, whenever they start seeing all of these other species of fish, because a lot of anglers now are getting good enough with their electronics that they can identify that, oh, those are white bass, not bass, or not largemouth bass, or those are striper, not largemouth spotted bass. So what will happen is that the guys will start catching white bass and they'll give up, or they'll see the white bass and they won't even try fishing around those areas. But that a lot of times can be a mistake, especially when you're fishing in a competitive scenario like a Bassmaster Open, where there are a ton of fish in a given area, or a ton of fishermen, in a given area. to get a competitive advantage over all those fishermen, you're going to need to look past some of these things, like look past the white bass, or with Joey Cifuentes, look past all those spawning crappie and actually look for the bass that are potentially feeding on those spawning crappie instead of just getting caught up by, oh, there's crappie here, there's probably not a lot of bass. Pretty interesting stuff right there. More questions. People are asking me to look at their specific lakes. I'm not going to go on that rabbit hole, guys, because if I look at one person's lake, then everyone's going to want me to look at their lake. So if you keep the questions more high level, it would be appreciated. I just don't want anyone to feel bad that I didn't break down their lake in particular. Let's see here. What's your favorite crankbait color during the pre-spawn? Probably, well, it depends on what crankbait I'm throwing. I'll show you my favorite crankbait in the pre-spawn. That might, I don't know if that'll answer your question, but it will maybe help. So my favorite pre-spawn crankbait is a Spro Rock Crawler 55. And it's just a great little crankbait. It works super well in dirtier water, stained water, clear water. If I had to pick one color in this bait, I really like to go with this Ozark Craw color, basically. It's like an orange, kind of a brighter orange. I like a brighter crankbait, even in clear water. Maybe not like super clear water. If I had to go with like a perfect clear water crankbait like this red crawfish, that's a little bit better. Like a translucent red works better in the clear water, or maybe something that's even more translucent like this ghost orange craw if I'm fishing in super clear water. But usually I'm cranking in a little bit more stained water, so like this Ozark Craw color is great. It has that orange, has a little bit of green, has a little bit of red to it. I really like that type of color, and it comes in a bunch of different baits. A lot of guys will go with like straight red, for example. I'm not a big fan of straight red. I do catch fish on straight red, but I really like orange more than red in general. And then the only other color I might throw in the pre-spawn, if those fish are getting really keyed in on the dirty water, is like a Strike King, not KVS, KVD. Okay, that's not what I want. KVD 1.5, maybe. There we go. Just like a regular KVD 1. None of these are, anyways. Okay, well, it's like a Chartreuse Blackback. That's a really good color for really dirty water, but that orange will still work in that dirty water. So if I had to pick one color in the pre-spawn, it would be that crankbaits in that rock crawler color that I was showing earlier, that like that Ozark Craw, or some sort of like orange-ish, maybe like this burnt orange craw. This is another really good color. That type of color is what I like to throw. Let's see here. What temp and clarity do you give up on the deep bite 15 feet plus? I never give up on the deep bite. I just go for it all the time. The main thing is that clarity does play a key role. If I get water clarity that is more than 2 foot of visibility, I will fish out to that 15 and beyond. If the water clarity is less than 2 foot of visibility, that's kind of my cutoff for fishing 15 feet plus. Water temperature wise, I'll fish 15 feet plus literally year round. I can catch them in that depth year round. There's always bass living out there. But if you have, let's say, 6 inches to a foot of water visibility, usually those bass are going to be setting up in less than 15 feet, usually in like that 4 to 12 foot range. How do you target bass on lakes with lots of docks? That's a great question. Docks, with a lake with a lot of docks, my main concern, for example, like on a Grand Lake, is not actually the docks themselves. The docks are kind of irrelevant. So if we go here to, for example, Grand Lake, you'll see there's docks everywhere. There's all kinds of docks. Well, the docks themselves don't actually make a difference. The docks are just there. They're just in the area. So it's not like sometimes there are special docks that are just better than others, where you'll have like a brush pile here that's just loaded with fish. But the main key on lakes with lots of docks is, one, the bottom composition. So whether you have pea gravel, chunk rock, bluff bank, sand, whether there's really soft, muddy, silty bottom versus like a little bit harder clay or like a pea gravel bottom. So bottom composition is really key. And also the steepness of the bank. This bank, for example, has a very gradual slope, maybe 15-degree slope, where this bank over here almost has like a 60 to 80-degree slope, like almost a bluff bank. So the steeper the bank, a lot of times, the better the bank. Sometimes they want the flatter banks with the docks. So really what I do when I go to a lake with lots of docks is I'll try to fish as many types of bottom composition, bank angle combinations as I can. So I will fish flat banks with mud. I'll fish flat banks with sand, flat banks with pea gravel, flat banks with chunk rock. Then I'll fish steeper banks with all those bottom compositions, and then very steep banks with those bottom compositions. And eventually you'll find that one of those bank angles and bottom composition combinations is going to be better than the other. The other thing is that sometimes those bass are going to be more towards the main lake on the docks. Sometimes they're more towards the back half of the creeks on the docks. Sometimes they are going to be more towards the mouths of the little pockets and cuts. Sometimes they're more towards the backs of these pockets and cuts. For example, on Grand Lake in the pre-spawn, a lot of the fish are not going to be on these main lake docks out here. They're going to be way back in the back on these docks that are back in these pockets way back in here. So not only you have to worry about bank angle and bottom composition, but you also have to figure out where the docks are within the pockets, whether they're right on the main lake, they're back in the backs of the creeks, the water visibility. There's a lot of factors that go into dock fishing. I don't like dock fishing that much because there's too much variability. So I just ignore the docks and just graph offshore because then I don't have to deal with all that. Let's see here. Oh, now I'm getting a ton of questions in. Where were you guys like 5 minutes ago? Just kidding, but good. I'm glad I'm getting questions, but a bunch of people. Do you travel to some of the lakes you have mapping for? And if so, have you thought about on the water training for them while you're in town? I do travel to check out some of the lakes, but unfortunately I do not have, I don't have any time when I'm there, unfortunately. So yeah, that's kind of a bummer. I won't have time to do on the water lessons or anything like that. I just super busy on that. What's the best way to catch largemouth out of a school of white bass? How long before you move on? Usually, just like I mentioned, try to fish below the white bass. So get a bait that falls past the white bass. A lot of times a football jig will go through the white bass and then won't actually bite it. Also, a big deep dive and crankbait, trying to get it past the white bass school and reel it through the bottom of the school. Those are two really good deals. Or like a big swim bait, let it hit the bottom and reel it below the level of the school. Because the bass will set up, as I mentioned, I talked about that earlier in the stream, but the bass will set up underneath the white bass schools. I showed this graphic earlier, so if you want to go back, it's somewhere in the stream. I already talked about it, how to do that. Let's see here. Let's see here. Will the bass be spawning at Gunnersville by mid-April? Most likely. There's most likely going to be post-spawn bass as well in Gunnersville already. There's probably going to be bass that are pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn already on all those TVA lakes. And then asking about lake breakdowns. Unfortunately, I don't do lake breakdowns anymore, guys, about like looking at people's lakes. I just don't have the time. I'm trying to make the deep dive apps so that we can get breakdowns on all the lakes as opposed to just one lake. So that is the deal. Let's see here. Video idea: follow behind the bigger multi-day tournament events and teach on finding and catching pressured bass. That is not a bad idea. I might do that if some of the tournaments come here close behind me. There's a couple lakes here close that might work. I don't want to necessarily travel to do that because otherwise you might as well just fish the tournaments, which that's one of the main deterrents for me fishing tournaments is doing the traveling. That's not something I really enjoy doing all that much. Deep dive lakes in Michigan. Yeah, we're working on that. There are no Michigan lakes right now in the deep dive app. We are focused on lowland and highland reservoirs to start out because a lot of the lakes down over in Michigan right now are still like frozen over or just getting unfrozen. So we're waiting to figure out how to handle all the grass stuff because a lot of those Michigan lakes have matted grass and everything. So we're trying to solve that problem down the road here, but we will add those lakes here in the future, but not right now. Let's see here. Any features of water clarity available in the free version, just try out. We are going to try to put in a free trial, I think, here pretty soon. I'm not sure exactly when we're going to do that, but we're going to try to put in a free trial so you can just try everything for free. and then it's like a 7-day free trial. Don't know the status on that, so I don't know exactly, but we do plan on doing that. We just are trying to get this water clarity and the pattern stuff out right now. That's like taking up all of our time just getting it out into the app. So I know right now for some guys they're probably like, oh man, why don't you have why don't you have this or all my lakes and everything? And I do want to let you know that we are trying our best to get as many of these lakes in the app as fast as possible. So like for example here, got the app pulled up. We're adding lakes in literally every day, just putting this map in the app and all of the tabs and all of the sliders and the functionality and everything like that takes a ton of effort and time. So we are working as hard as we can to get as many lakes scaled up as possible. That is our number one mission, is to scale to as many lakes as we can, but we don't just want to throw out bad data or anything, so we're scaling at a speed that allows us to make sure we still are providing high quality as well as getting out lakes. So again, I'll be giving out a lake list for all of these features and stuff in the next stream and in my next videos, so definitely stay tuned so you guys can see that. I'll be streaming next week again, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on the Fish Moment YouTube channel, and I'll have all that. But yeah, we are trying to knock out as many of these lakes as we can. We just have a lot of stuff, and like stuff like the free trial and all that stuff just takes time. And so if we put in a free trial on the app, that means that we will get less water clarity lakes out. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg, where it's like we need to get as many lakes in the app as possible so everyone can try it, but we also want to make sure people can try it. So anyways, we're trying our best, I promise. We have meetings every single week to figure out all this stuff, and we're trying to make the best moves we can for you guys. Let's see here. How do you determine to fish a jerkbait or a spinnerbait? What are the factors? I usually throw spinnerbaits in real muddy water, so like less than 2 foot of water visibility, and I'll throw a jerkbait when you have more than 2 foot of water visibility. That's a good general rule. What would you use to target and find big females after a cold front? In cloudy conditions, rain, after weeks of warmer weather, and some fish are spawning. Usually I would just say fish offshore and try to catch the pre-spawn bass, and don't try to mess with those big females that are up already committed trying to spawn. I'm not very good at fishing for those fish in general, so I would just back off and try to find pre-spawn fish, or if it's been so warm, there's probably already post-spawn fish, so try to find some post-spawn females. They're not going to be as big, but they're going to be easier to catch in general. And then Guy P says, should buy my boat, but I don't want to take away your enjoyment of watching from your boat, watching the live streams from your boat, Guy. At least you can live vicariously through the boat and the stream. So, but anyways, glad you guys are enjoying the stream. Looks like there is a ton of people who are enjoying it. Appreciate all of that. And then trying to get all these podcasts out as well onto the Fish the Moment podcast app this week. Or not the Fish the Moment podcast app, but the podcast apps. So Apple, App Store, and Spotify. Sorry, I don't know what I'm talking about. I've been talking for like an hour. The podcast app for Apple, and on Spotify, you can go find the Fish the Moment podcast. You can just search Fish the Moment podcast, or just search it online on like Google, Fish the Moment podcast, and all of these live streams get posted there, so you can listen to them. Go into the lake if you want a refresher or anything, and you can listen to all of my old live streams as well. This is number 137, which is kind of crazy. Kind of strange that I've done 137 of these hour-long live streams. That's a lot of talking to myself, but well, I'm talking to you guys too. But a lot of me sitting in a room just talking. So hopefully you guys enjoy this, and glad that everyone seems to be enjoying all of the content. And Joshua, last comment here. I found a school of bass on February 15th on a small creek arm off the main lake in Kentucky. Do you think they'll still be there now? I haven't been back. Most likely those fish probably have moved, but they may have just moved further into the creek. They may have already been up spawning. They could still be there. There could be fish that actually already spawned and pulled back out and now are post-spawn there. So I would check it, but I would also check that surrounding area because there's probably fish around there as well. Good deal, guys. Well, that's it for the stream tonight. I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter because I didn't have a ton to talk about. Just wanted to break down some of that multi-species stuff for you guys. And if you guys enjoyed this live stream, make sure to leave a like down below. If you're watching this after the fact as I post this to YouTube, thanks for checking out the stream all the way through. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the stream and topics you'd like me to discuss in upcoming Fish the Moment live streams. We'll be back again next Monday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, so be on the lookout for that stream next week. And other than that, we'll see you guys soon. Have a great